Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Munib Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the top stories first. Israel says its warplanes have targeted multiple locations on the Gaza Strip. The Israeli Defense Ministry says it struck Hamas underground infrastructure in retaliation to explosive balloon attacks. No casualties have been reported so far. In Lebanon, protesters have taken to the streets of Beirut following the blast that resulted in killing 157 people and injuring over 5,000 on Tuesday. Clashes broke out between riot police and the demonstrators, who are calling for the government to resign. Meanwhile, state media claims authorities have taken 16 people into custody as a part of an investigation into port warehouse blast. The global number of COVID-19 cases has crossed 19 million with over 714,000 deaths. This comes as the United States records 2,060 more deaths and over 58,000 new infections, increasing the tally to nearly 4.9 million. In Brazil, 1,237 people have lost their lives to the virus in the last 24 hours, taking the fatality tally to over 98,000. Meanwhile, Pakistan has reported 782 new cases and 17 more deaths, increasing the toll to 6,052. News in detail after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now for the news in detail. We begin from Israel, which says its warplanes have targeted multiple locations on the Gaza Strip. The Israeli Defense Ministry says it struck Hamas underground infrastructure in retaliation to explosive balloon attacks. Israeli warplanes struck the position in Beit Lahia belonging to the Izz ad-Din al-Qassam bridges. No casualties have been reported so far. This is the second escalation between Israel and Gaza this week. Earlier, Hamas said Israel is exporting its internal crisis to the Gaza Strip. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has hailed the recent Security Council meeting on occupied Kashmir. In a series of tweets, Khan said the Kashmir issue has to be resolved in accordance with the relevant UNSC resolutions. He said the Security Council has the responsibility for not only maintaining global peace, but also of ensuring the implementation of its resolutions on occupied Kashmir. He added that Kashmiris must be given the right of self-determination under a free and fair plebiscite. Khan said Pakistan will continue to extend all possible support to the people of the occupied valley until they secure this right. The US has commended prominent Afghan leaders for holding a major meeting, the Loya Jirga, to decide on the release of remaining prisoners from the Taliban's list. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said a positive outcome will remove the last hurdles for the intra-Afghan negotiations. Pompeo also called on Afghan political leaders to seize the opportunity for peace. Pompeo acknowledged the release of prisoners is unpopular, but said difficult actions will lead to an end of the 40-year-long war. The grand meeting will commence today in Kabul. Meanwhile, the Taliban have emphasized on the early release of the remaining prisoners and the start of peace talks. Now, in Lebanon, anti-government protests have taken to the streets of Beirut after the blast that killed 157 people and injured over 5,000 on Tuesday. Clashes broke out between riot police and the demonstrators, who are calling for the government to resign. Riot police were deployed at the protests after some demonstrators burned optics and hurled rocks at security forces. The protesters blamed the government's negligence for the blast. Since the explosion, 2 government officials have resigned, saying the catastrophe has highlighted the need for a change in leadership. Meanwhile, the state media says authorities have taken 16 people into custody as a part of an investigation into the blast. Now, the global number of COVID-19 cases has crossed 19 million, with over 714,000 deaths. This comes as the US records 2,060 more deaths and over 58,000 new infections, increasing the tally to nearly 4.9 million. In Brazil, 1,237 people have lost their lives to the virus in the last 24 hours, taking the fatalities tally to over 98,000. More details in this report.
The coronavirus continues on its path of devastation, with keeping the Americas and Europe in its sights. The University of Washington forecasts the U.S. death toll can reach 300,000 by December if President Donald Trump goes ahead with opening schools. Mexico's death toll has crossed 50,000 mark after 819 more died in the last 24 hours. In hopes of stopping the surge of the virus, Brazil has vowed to set aside $356 million for COVID-19 vaccine developed by AstraZeneca and Oxford University.
That was a job done with the Health Ministry, the Oswaldo Cruz Foundation, with the AstraZeneca company and with Oxford University in London, England. We studied all the vaccines, and this is the most promising so far and should start being used in the population from December or January next year.
In Europe, the second wave of the coronavirus is surging as many countries reimpose lockdowns to curb further transmission. The UK is set to remove Belgium, Andorra and Bahamas from safe travel list amid fresh cases being reported in the countries. Denmark has dropped plans to lift curbs on public gatherings originally planned for this month after seeing a spike in infections. France has reported more than 1,600 cases for the second running day. As many countries around the world work on cure against the virus, the World Health Organization has warned of vaccine nationalism.
Vaccine nationalism is not good. It will not help us. When we say it should be a global public good, it's not sharing for the sake of sharing. It's only because it has advantages. For the world to recover faster, it has to recover together. Because it's a globalized world. The economy is intertwined. Part of the world or few countries cannot be a safe haven and recover. They should recover together with the rest of the world.
Meanwhile, in Asia, mainland China is still trying to get the locally transmitted infections under control. China has recorded 37, while South Korea reported 20 infections overnight.
Meanwhile, in Pakistan, 17 more people have died from COVID-19 in the last 24 hours, raising the total to 6,052. The Health Ministry says 782 cases were reported overnight as the tally crossed the 282,000. The ministry said over 258,000 people have recovered from the virus so far. It said there are now over 18,000 active cases in the country. Sindh remains the worst hit province with over 122,000 infections, while Punjab has reported more than 94,000 cases. Meanwhile, the government has announced to reopen tourism and hospitality sector, cinemas and sport activities, among others, from Monday. Meanwhile, in Sri Lanka, the ruling alliance of the Rajapaksa brothers have won a 2/3 majority in parliamentary elections. Official results say the Sri Lanka People's Front has bagged 145 out of 225 seats and 5 more from its allies. The party received 6.8 million of the popular vote. Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa and his brother Gotabaya have secured the super majority needed to carry out the promised constitutional changes. Gotabaya Rajapaksa said the results indicate an excellent victory for the SLPP. The opposition of the former Prime Minister Ranil has been trounced, having lost all but one of the 106 seats it held in the outgoing parliament. US President Donald Trump has signed an executive order to ban transactions with ByteDance, the parent company of Chinese app TikTok, in 45 days. Trump also took similar action against Chinese-based tech giant Tencent, which is the operator of WeChat. The executive order alleges the apps capture personal and proprietary information of users, which is then accessible by the Chinese Communist Party. This comes after Washington said it was stepping up efforts to purge untrusted Chinese apps from U.S. digital networks, citing significant threats. Earlier, Trump threatened ByteDance it has to find a U.S. buyer by 15 September or the app will be shut down. U.S. Health Secretary says his upcoming trip to Taiwan is designed to reaffirm Washington's partnership with Taipei. In an interview, Azar praised Taipei for its transparency and cooperation in the public health field. He said the visit is about Taiwan and the U.S. as well as the joint partnership in public health. On Wednesday, China slammed Azar's visit to Taiwan, which Beijing considers a renegade province. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin said Taiwan remains the most important and sensitive issue in Sino-U.S. relations. He said Beijing opposed any official interaction between Washington and Taipei. This will be the highest level visit to the territory by a U.S. official in 4 decades. Moving on now, the U.S. has imposed sanctions on 3 individuals and a Malta-based company, accusing them of contributing to instability in Libya. In a statement, the Treasury Department said it blacklisted Libyan national Faisal al-Wadi for smuggling drugs and fuel into Malta. Also blacklisted were 2 associates, Malta-based company Al-Wifaq Limited and the vessel Maraya. The Treasury said Wadi used the vessel in his alleged smuggling operations. It said that competition for control of smuggling routes, oil facilities and transport nodes is a key driver of conflict in Libya. Deputy Treasury Secretary Justin said the U.S. is committed to exposing illicit networks exploiting Libya's resources. Now, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says U.S. Special Representative for Iran, Brian Hook, is stepping down. In a statement, Pompeo said U.S. Envoy for Venezuela, Elliot Abrams, will add Iran to his role following a transition period with Hook. Pompeo did not give a reason for Hook's decision to leave. It was not clear when Hook will finish, but the announcement comes at a crucial time for U.S. diplomacy on Iran. The UN Security Council prepares to vote next week on a U.S. bid to extend an international arms embargo on Iran. If unsuccessful in extending the arms embargo on Iran, the U.S. has threatened to trigger a return of all UN sanctions under a snapback process. More news coming up after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now moving on to the news stories. Egypt says it has signed a bilateral agreement with Greece on the delimitation of maritime jurisdictions. Speaking at a joint press conference in Cairo with his Greek counterpart Nikos Dendias, Egyptian Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry said the deal opens new horizons for economic cooperations with Athens. While Dendias said the agreement with Cairo reflects the dimensions of cooperation between the 2 countries in combating regional threats. Meanwhile, Turkey has reacted strongly to the maritime agreements between Greece and Egypt. Ankara's foreign ministry said the deal designated an exclusive economic zone in the eastern Mediterranean falls in the area of Turkey's continental shelf. It said Turkey considers the agreement null and void. The ministry added that the deal also violated Libya's maritime rights. In the U.S., New York's Attorney General has announced a lawsuit aimed at dissolving the powerful National Rifle Association over alleged financial mismanagement. Letitia James said the NRA has diverted millions of dollars to leaders, including its chief executive, for their personal use. She said for these years of misconduct, New York is seeking an order to dissolve the NRA in its entirety. James said the corruption is so broad that total dissolution of the organization is necessary. The NRA responded by suing James in federal court, saying she had violated the organization's right to free speech. U.S. President Donald Trump branded the lawsuit against the NRA as a very terrible thing. Moving on, Iraq says it will make an additional cut in its oil production of about 400,000 barrels per day in August as per the OPEC Plus supply reductions pact. In a statement, the oil ministry said the oil output cut in August will be over and above the agreed cut for the month. The OPEC and allies began a record supply cut in May to bolster oil prices hammered by the coronavirus crisis. Iraq is cutting output by 1.06 million barrels per day under the deal. Baghdad says it's committed to the OPEC Plus agreement and will boost compliance. The country had told OPEC Plus it will make up for the overproduction in May and June through larger cuts in later months. Iraq's total oil exports for July averaged 2.76 million barrels per day. Now in business news, stock markets in Asia are trading lower while investors await major economic data release for the month of July. Shares of Chinese Tencent plunged nearly 7% after US President Donald Trump issued executive orders against WeChat and TikTok. In Japan, the Nikkei 225 slipped nearly 1% in early trade. Shanghai Composite traded over 1.5% lower. Hong Kong's Hang Seng was down almost 2%. South Korea's Kospi advanced fractionally, but shares of Korean Airlines soared more than 7% in early trading. Meanwhile, shares in Australia's ASX 200 dipped by 0.68%, while investors look forward to new monetary policy to be announced later in the day. And with that, we come to the end of the bulletin. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.news. Take care.